Thank you for watching the Housing Oregon YouTube channel. Be sure to join our network and get involved in the work that we are doing. If you can, please like and subscribe. It helps us build this channel, which serves as a platform to communicate with our members. This video is part of our 2025 annual conference. We're looking for folks to be on the conference planning committee. Please email info@housingoregon.org.
All right, I'm sensing a lull in the conversation, and we have maybe 30 seconds, so I will just kick us off. My name is Jennifer Bragar. I am a partner at Tomasi Bragar Dubé, practicing land use, real estate, and environmental law. I am also the current president of Housing Land Advocates, where we work to ensure that land is available for affordable housing. We have a sign-up sheet going around if you want to be on the list to receive our newsletters. We have a table outside. I'll announce that again. We have some materials here. And if you were at our panel last year, we provided an update on recent legislation aimed at breaking down past patterns of housing segregation. We also gave you a teaser of a case that HLA was mounting against the city of Happy Valley. Today, we are here to give you an update on all of these issues. I am joined by Joshua Hall, an independent attorney and historian who works on the intersection of law, social power, and finance. He sits on the board of directors for the Public Banking Institute and is going to provide us some insights today on the housing production strategies adopted in 2024 and 2025. Stephen Crawford is the legal director at the Fair Housing Council of Oregon, and he is going to provide an update about the Housing Land Advocates and Fair Housing Council of Oregon case against the city of Happy Valley. And Ariel Kane is an economic planner within the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, the Long Range Planning Department at the City of Portland. They were the project manager for Portland's inaugural housing production strategy adopted in 2024. Ariel's going to provide maybe one of the brighter lights of our reporting today about housing production strategies. And I may not be able to restrain myself in adding additional color to the conversation as we proceed. And we are also going to leave some time for questions at the end. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Josh, who will then pass it on to Ariel, who will then pass it on to Stephen, and then I will do the Q&A. So thank you, Josh.
All right. As Jennifer said, my name is Joshua Hall. Did not have the opportunity to participate in HLA's panel last year, so I'm very happy for the invite this year. To give a little bit of background, I've been doing HPS evaluations for HLA for 3 years now. Sam, you were still involved with HLA back then. So I've read quite a few of these HPS documents since the enabling legislation was created back in 2019. Just a quick overview. I presume a lot of people in this room know what the housing production strategies are. They are essentially forward-looking, non-land use decision planning documents, very specifically non-land use decisions, that cities have to adopt if they are 10,000 residents or larger. They essentially map out how the city is going to accommodate its ongoing housing needs for the short-term horizon, think like 8 years out. These housing production strategies include a plethora of different approaches to expanding housing availability throughout the jurisdiction adopting it. But what we're really aiming to talk about in this panel regarding the HPSs is the shortcomings. The idea is really good. It forces cities to kind of map out how they're going to address coming housing needs. But HLA has been evaluating these between myself and other volunteers since the program began, and we've noticed quite a few shortcomings. One of the issues that I believe Gene Dahlquist, who unfortunately could not be with us on the panel today, had brought up before I joined onto this project is that the HPSs do not address issues around segregation because cities are not mandated to. HPSs really only have to include broad policy statements on how the city is going to encourage the development of additional housing units. So you often see strategies in the HPSs such as the reduction of fees, individual tax breaks, or quite often the promise to rezone certain parts of the city to allow for more dense housing. One of the main issues, however, that Jean has brought up, and I think all of the volunteers who have evaluated these HPSs for HLA have noticed, though, is that there is no requirement within the statute or within the administrative rules to do a geospatial analysis of how the adopted measures or the proposed measures will help to reduce segregation within cities. And by segregation within cities, we mean, in large part, economic boundaries to preventing certain folks from certain demographics from being able to reside really where they want to within a city. And so one of the best examples of that particular problem comes with the Happy Valley housing production strategy, which was released this year or published this year. Within Happy Valley's housing production strategy, they noted a lot of the very common HPS themes that we've seen pop up: rezoning, allowing for different types of siting and design on certain parcels throughout the city, as well as all of the financial incentives that pretty much every HPS relies on. However, Happy Valley's HPS included what might seem very helpful to everyone, which is the expansion of cottage clusters in the city, which is one of the protected middle housing types under House Bill 2001 and more recent legislation that we'll be talking about later in this presentation. However, Happy Valley, right before issuing their HPS, had actually banned cottage clusters through an overlay zone throughout much of their city, especially the wealthier neighborhood known as the Bowl. And this highlights one of the problems with the HPS process, which is within the HPS, Happy Valley was saying one thing, which is we're going to expand cottage clusters throughout the city, while actual adopted municipal legislation prohibited them over large portions of the city. And although we haven't seen such blatant hypocrisy in other HPSs, that really sums up the worry that at least some of us who have been doing this work have regarding the HPS process. As of now, there is no real enforcement mechanism at DLCD to force cities to stick to their HPSs. Anyone who went to the HAPO DLCD presentation yesterday would know that those enforcement mechanisms are being developed at the agency level. However, it remains to be seen the extent to which the agencies will be able to actually make cities stick with what they propose in their HPSs in terms of expanding housing and especially in terms of reducing economic segregation. Sorry, we have a lot of concerns with the HPS process. I'm trying to summarize this without just restating what we've printed in our handout. Again, really, the biggest issue and thing that we would like to see included in the HPS process is a geospatial analysis of how the proposed housing production strategies will actually affect segregation within cities and affect the character of cities in general. One of the other problems that we've detected with the HPS is through a rather rigorous evaluation of the HPSs that have been drafted and published, is that cities don't like to commit to any of these actions. The language used in every HPS, and I'm not exaggerating when I say every HPS, is conditional. Every single action item, with very few exceptions, says something like the city might adopt a new zoning ordinance, or the city could exempt affordable housing from certain municipal taxes. They don't actually commit to anything. And it remains to be seen, again, because DLCD's enforcement is not online for this yet, how it will be enforced when all of their commitments are conditional. Another issue that we have detected within the HPSs is cities throughout Oregon, so these are cities of 10,000 residents and above, have committed to upzoning. However, it's often in areas that either already have some level of housing density or won't be developed, such as waterfront commercial districts. And instead, instead of upzoning in areas that actually could see residential development, such as zoning that is currently single-family housing only. That is about the end of, I think, my portion of the HPS overview and our primary concerns. I believe, Jennifer, do you have some more concern?
Not concerned so much, but I just wanted to provide a little bit of perspective. So you heard Joshua say that we're looking at economic segregation, and I just want to be really clear for the audience here that economic segregation is a proxy for protected classes, particularly in Oregon. There's data that you could connect between your consolidated plans in your county with cities that have higher incomes, so they are exclusionary. And so it's not just an economic question for HLA, it does connect to the Fair Housing Act and protected classes under the Fair Housing Act. I'm also gonna just leave you with a little bit of a teaser as well. So Housing Land Advocates is currently in the process of opposing an urban growth boundary expansion in the city of Sherwood. And one of our major contentions in that has been, historically, we've commented to the city of Sherwood and said, you have done nothing for affordable housing. You are one of the most high income neighborhoods in Washington County. You know, get your act together. They didn't go through an urban growth boundary expansion the last time around when there were affordability requirements, not even binding requirements. It just said adopt some policies that would allow some affordable housing. It didn't force the construction of affordable housing, but Sherwood said, oh no, we're not gonna do that, we're stepping away. And then you come up to this urban growth boundary expansion, which is beating the deadline for the city of Sherwood to submit an HPS. And an HPS has the requirement, under state law, to in fact affirmatively further fair housing. So all the policies that they need to adopt have to show that they're breaking down this historical segregatory patterns that we see throughout the country, but certainly in the city of Sherwood. And instead of looking closely at that urban growth boundary expansion that's beating the HPS, all the local governments so far have approved this urban growth boundary expansion. And HLA is standing up and saying, hey, take a look at this. You're snatching, victory from the jaws of defeat. Like there's no way that HPS can succeed if you allow them to expand the urban growth boundary without requiring this increase of density within the urban growth boundary first. And that's our argument. We made it. And the director's report just came out, and they're supporting, from DLCD, they're supporting this urban growth boundary expansion. We're like, you're not even accepting that these are new rules under state law, that the purpose of Goal 10 is, in fact, now to affirmatively further fair housing. So when Josh talks about us, HLA, making comments on these housing production strategies, also be aware that HLA and Fair Housing Council of Oregon are often the only people commenting on this. only people. I think I saw in Westland one member of the public wrote like a paragraph of an email to the city or to DLCD about that HPS. But otherwise, it is just radio silence, and HLA is there, and Fair Housing Council of Oregon is there. And so this is the public process. These cities are insulated from a land use review, and they're adopting policies that are supposed to undo all of this history. And we're saying it's not going far enough. So stay tuned on all of this. But for now, let's hear from Ariel. It's Ariel's next, right? To talk about a housing production strategy that went pretty well in our book compared to what we've been seeing. So thanks, Joshua, and now Ariel.
Yes, thank you. Ariel Kane, economic planner at the City of Portland. I was one of the lead planners on our housing production strategy, and I'm sorry, I will be the only person, I think, giving you a presentation with a slide deck, but it was, when Jean and June invited me to come speak, it was hard to think of a presentation that talked about data analysis without showing you some of our analysis. So at least you'll get a break from making eye contact with me. So I'm mostly going to talk about the housing needs analysis and housing production strategy, but the work that we did for analyzing racial and economic segregation as part of our housing production strategy was built off of other reports. So just highlighting these here, and the links are also in the PowerPoint, just the historical context of racist planning, A Dream Rezoned, and the Anti-Displacement Action Plan Foundation report really added a lot of context for the housing needs analysis as we built it. Two of the main sort of analyses from these documents is 1930s redlining, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It was a real estate tool to segregate households across many jurisdictions, and within Portland, this was what the map looked like. And just comparing that to a similar time frame of our single family zoning, the colors are a little bit different, but A and B are where you would consider those sort of highest grade housing areas. And those are blue and green on the 1930s map, but are essentially the yellow on the 1927 single family zone map. And I'm showing these because they sort of frame what happens when we look at our housing needs analysis and our housing production strategy. And Josh talked about the housing production strategy, but really foundational to that is the housing needs analysis requirement that DLCD has, where we are required to look at what needs we have over the next 20 years, and the housing production strategy is how we're supposed to be saying this is what we're going to do and what we're committing to the state to do in order to develop that housing. So for context, the City of Portland, we did ours in 2023 prior to the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis production target being assigned earlier this year. So we had a sort of higher H&A adopted target of about 120,000 at this time, because it's been a couple of years. It's closer to 110,000 still needing to be built. And then the state has assigned us a much lower target, 58,000-ish units needing to be produced over the next 20 years. Very different, probably. We'll aim for somewhere in the middle. But that looks at not just affordability, which is shown here, but also by different housing types. Some of that is based off of protected classes. Others is just household composition, so larger families, families with children, older adults, households that have members with disabilities. So it really dives deep into a number of different housing needs and housing types. It also looks at single dwelling versus middle housing and multi-unit. I won't talk about that anymore, though. But the housing production strategy is supposed to build off of that, and the state has new requirements which have been talked about in different spaces that didn't apply to our housing production strategy because we did complete it before the new rules were in effect, but we saw the writing on the wall to a certain extent that new locational analysis will be required in future housing production strategies, and we saw many of those requirements as being useful for understanding how to develop our strategies and how to make effective strategies to meet the needs that we had identified in our housing needs analysis. Because another thing that was a part of the housing needs analysis was looking at our zoned land capacity, and if we had these 120,000 units that we needed to build, did we have enough zoned land to be able to accommodate that? Our analysis said yes, we have about twice as much capacity as we have housing unit need. based on current real estate conditions and our current zoning patterns. So it really became a question of where do we want to focus building our housing and who are we building our housing for? And so these additional analyses were really helpful in helping us understand how to prioritize different actions. So I'll talk a little bit more about some of the analyses that went into the housing production strategy that built off of that H&A before I get into how we connected them to some of our actions. This is a map of just racially concentrated, racially concentrated areas of affluence and racially concentrated areas of poverty across the city of Portland. So this is analysis I did using publicly available data, which is also available to all of you, US Census data by tract. It basically looks at, within Portland, areas that have higher white households than the area's median, so the metro area, and then who earn higher than the median income for the area as well. And then the flip side of that is where there are non-white households, greater concentrations of non-white households who are also earning 200% or less of the poverty level in certain areas. And you can see there are heavy concentrations of racially concentrated areas of affluence and poverty in various parts of the city, most happening on the outskirts, except for in Central City, where you can also see, if you're able to see, the sort of dark blue in that area. And this isn't included in the housing production strategy, but it's based off of analysis that I think it came out of California, but duplicated it for the city of Portland. And I did have a joke in here, if you've ever seen The Office, that was like, corporate wants you to tell me the difference between these two pictures. And she says they're the same. And they're not exactly the same, but they're quite similar. So I measured areas that have high rentals. So I think it was greater than 80% of the households in that area are renting, or if they are, there's less than 20% of the households that are in that area who are renting, then it's considered a rental desert. So when we look at the 1930s redlining, the racially concentrated areas of affluence and our rental deserts, there's a lot of similarity. There's a lot of overlap with those A and B areas. I've taken off the C and D for us. So that really gives us an opportunity to look at where we have continued exclusionary practices or practices that have historically been exclusionary that continue to perpetuate segregation, economic and racial. And so that is a pretty solid foundation for looking at fair housing for the city of Portland, but we did do other analyses also. We looked at, I won't show you all of the maps for these because visually that's a lot and also a lot to talk about, but we looked at centers and corridors. We looked at areas of economic vulnerability, which is a similar metric. We also looked at the inverse, areas of opportunity, so areas that have a high mix of desirable services, opportunities, access to jobs and amenities, complete neighborhoods, think 20-minute city neighborhood, low carbon areas or areas that have sort of low vehicle commuting, and then hazard risk areas of a couple of different kinds. We looked at landslides, liquefaction zones, and wildfire risk. And we sort of looked at 4 different buckets. So the first was, where do our current households live? This is just important for understanding the context of the city of Portland and how we are right now. And I've highlighted in yellow, I don't know how it looks up there, but highlighted in yellow those racially concentrated areas of affluence and poverty and where those sort of land. So we've got about 8% of our households currently living in affluent, racially concentrated areas of affluence. And then on the flip side, where are we developing our affordable housing, or historically, where's our historical development been happening? I think it's no surprise considering there are areas of affluence concentration, but less than 1% of our regulated housing has been built in areas that would be considered racially concentrated areas of affluence, but 28%, so a higher proportion than our households have seen development for regulated housing. But a bright light on this is also high opportunity areas. We have many of our households living in high opportunity areas, and also many of our new regulated housing going into high opportunity areas, so there's also that. And then the other side was wanting to understand, all else being equal, if we made no changes to our zoning, if we made no changes to our development patterns, where would new demand occur? And where would we expect housing units to be built? So based on the last 20 years of development, and then where's our current zoned capacity? As you can see, our racially concentrated areas of affluence are quite low. in terms of where we would expect new demand, because we haven't been seeing a lot of development happening in those areas, and they tend to be that lower density single family zoning that I showed you a map of before. And so the same with capacity. If there's less density and less opportunity because we're providing less zoning capacity, we would expect that less residential capacity would be there as well. So how does that connect to our actions in the housing production strategy? Well, we have 35 actions. All of them are great and didn't receive any complaints. No, I'm just kidding. No, I really appreciated housing HLA and Fair Housing Coalition. You guys provided comments early and often, which was very helpful, and we had a lot of engagement. But we are still open to how we can continue to do better, especially since we'll have to do this again. But we have a few that I wanted to highlight that specifically correlate to those areas of racially concentrated areas of affluence and poverty. So one strategy is increase housing capacity in inner centers and corridors, and we did an infrastructure study basically in that black box that's outlined on the screen, just to see if we increased capacity, what the impact would be on our infrastructure, because we have lots of considerations when we do upzoning. But as you can see here, that's our current essentially single family zoning, but single family zoning is essentially middle housing zoning right now in the city of Portland. A lot is possible, but it would be considering upzoning in an area that has been historically affluent and also single family zoning. We are also looking at what we can do to improve development in our mixed use and multi-dwelling zones, which is highlighted here on this map. So this is specifically looking at our zoning bonuses and incentives, which are pretty focused on accessibility, affordability, and creating multi-bedroom units in our higher density housing. Sure. So it's in the black box that's on the screen. Yeah, it's a pretty large swath of neighborhoods like Hollywood, and also, if I can think of street names. I don't remember the exact parameters, but it's, I think, to 6th, to 6th, from Powell up to, it might be Albina, but I don't remember if it's Albina. Apologies, I don't remember the northern boundary. I can follow up. I can look at that later if you'd like me to. Yeah. Yeah, apologies, I don't I don't have all the street names memorized. But one of the other ones that's pretty geographically focused is the tax increment financing. So the TIF districts that our Portland Housing Bureau and Prosper Portland, our economic development agency, have been working on. These are very geographically focused, and all of them will have a housing action plan embedded as part of their action plan for the investments. There is also an affordable housing set aside from all of the TIF money, so that is one of the investments that will come out of that as well. Another is 82nd Avenue. This is a pretty major north-south line. This is one of our beloved exploratory actions. We committed to a study, which I know is not in the spirit of what DLCD or others would like, but because we have so much going on 82nd Avenue, this felt like a good place for a study, which doesn't count as an action under the state regulation. And then just, this is a couple of different actions, but the Portland Housing Bureau has been investing in preservation, acquisition, conversion, and funding of affordable housing all over the city. And as you can see, this is our distribution of affordable housing across the city, and it's important to us to maintain that portfolio and continue to invest in various areas of the city. And so they use the opportunity mapping as well as their own investment framework to sort of prioritize where that occurs.
The microphone since we're recording so people can hear what the questions are.
Thank you. Outside of the 82nd Avenue, what are the other 5 TIF districts, or have they been identified?
Yeah, great question. Yes. So 82nd Avenue is one of the TIF districts, Central East Side, East 205, Lloyd Holiday, Sumner Park Rose Argay, Columbia Corridor, and then, the west side. Yeah, and it's a little bit hard to see on the map, but that's if you think like Broadway corridor sort of area, Old Town, Chinatown, over in that area, I think. Sorry, I realize that's not a great map. My apologies. Okay, and then just a plug, we know that rules are changing, requirements are changing, so more analysis will be required of us in 6 years when we do all of this again. I know that DOCD has a session about their new dashboards and data and things that are happening. Actually, I think it's the next session. So I won't talk much about that, but just wanted to plug that those exist. There's a lot of public available data if you're interested, either as a planner and doing more analysis for your planning work, even while you're not doing your housing production strategy, or if you're somebody who wants to hold cities accountable to the data that's available to them to be doing these kinds of analyses, I think that that is also a useful application. That's what I have.
Thanks so much, Ariel. I'll just say again that HLA was really pleased to see the city of Portland actually reach out to our organization before they finalized their HPS to make a presentation to the board and to garner some feedback. It is the only city that has done that so far. If you work for a local government, feel free to use this as an example. We don't always have to be adversarial. We can in fact help create solutions. We have limited time, but can make some time if there are people who are interested in reaching out on the front end. And so congratulations, Ariel, on the huge undertaking. I will also say that HLA has been doing this work for a long time, and we started out advocating at Metro and asking for data about redlining, and they were reluctant to give it to us at the time because they didn't want to be perceived as racist in providing that information. And now to see the housing production strategy start with that kind of geospatial analysis that Joshua was talking about, it's just very exciting to kind of see that circle closing and to say, look, this is what we've been saying. So I will pass it on here to Stephen Crawford, who's going to give us a little bit of a deeper dive into the Happy Valley story. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. All right, maybe do we make it? Yeah, let's just go ahead. Okay, this is better. Yeah, hi everyone, thank you. My name is Stephen Crawford. I use he, him pronouns. I am the legal director at Fair Housing Council of Oregon. As I launch into this description, I just want to start with the caveat that by training and practice, I am a civil rights attorney first. And I got dragged into a land use case, which is a pretty specialized area of law. I have some land use professionals around me that probably will always know more about this subject matter than I will. So I would please feel free to interrupt me at any point. But with those caveats and expectations managed, I'll go ahead and start talking about the Happy Valley case. So last year, you may have attended this session. I didn't, but you may have. And learned that Happy Valley had passed an ordinance, the goal of which was to exclude the production, or exclude or limit the production of cottage clusters in the more affluent areas of the city, known as the Bowl. But what these areas all have in common is that they are the older parts of town. They are more affluent. They're closer to resources. They're closer to opportunities. Closer to the interstate, closer to Portland. They're not out in the middle of nowhere, and practically can be. So that's what their zone did. They justified this on a couple of different bases. Actually, I'll just start by the zone. The overlay zone was to prohibit cottage clusters, and there is actually a session after this on cottage clusters, and I understand people have choices to make. So I'll go into why cottage clusters are special for just really quickly. Cottage cluster, if you don't know, is a type of middle housing that was protected in House Bill 2001 and 2023. I feel like I'm talking about too many years, but 2001's a bill, not a year. It was protected in that bill, and any property zoned for, or any area zoned for single-family housing had to allow middle housing, including cottage clusters. So why did Happy Valley single out cottage clusters and say that they couldn't be permitted in the bowl while other forms of middle housing could be? We're kind of left to speculate on that a little bit, but we have, I have my guesses. There are reasons that cottage clusters are desirable. They're highly accessible for people with mobility disabilities because they don't sit on a high foundation like a lot of other forms of middle housing. They can be built at ground level. Something I see in my work is people with shared walls. Often there are people who benefit from having detached housing that might not be able to afford single family zoned housing to be able to benefit from that detached housing. Think about families with children with disabilities, how much easier their life is going to be if their neighbor can't hear their kids. Other things that make it kind of ideal, and what I think Happy Valley might not have liked about it, cottage clusters are great for infill. So you have an awkwardly shaped lot in a already developed part of the city. It's not a nice rectangle, well suited for the development of a quadplex, but for 3 separate structures might fit on there pretty well. So it's a great development option for landfill. So there are reasons why cottage clusters might have been the perfect thing to put in the bowl in Happy Valley. So naturally, Happy Valley decided to disallow them.
And let me just add that we heard that through the grapevine that there were people applying up to the day that this ordinance was passed to build cottage clusters in the bowl. And what we're talking about here are like up to 6 units, maybe around a plaza, maybe they're in a circle. They are detached, smaller housing units on a single family parcel of land.
Yeah, thanks for that clearer explanation than I gave of cottage clusters.
A complimentary one.
Complimentary. There's going to be even more if you go to that session next. It's not my session. I keep plugging it because it's his friend. Where was I? Oh, yeah. So Happy Valley justified this exclusionary zone with 2 primary things. First, they argued that it was going to increase cottage cluster development overall. And we all know that whole separate but equal thing, that cornerstone of American civil rights law, has worked out really well. It's what we all follow. So, obviously there weren't any problems with the separate but equal analysis in Happy Valley's, it's not separate but equal, but their point was you can build cottage clusters, it just has to be over there away from those of us with money. The other way they justified it was that the existing minority demographics in Happy Valley were already affluent enough, so they weren't likely to be impacted by a decision that limited access to more affordable housing. So I was being facetious when I said that separate but equal is a cornerstone of American civil rights, and if you didn't catch that, please, let's talk about some history after this. But those were both issues that we obviously we had problems with. They're not in the spirit of the bill that required that middle housing be allowed on all single-family zoning. And
let me just underscore that. I mean, it is 2025, and the city of Happy Valley had to adopt written findings for its decision, and they actually wrote, and you could read the quote, that people of color are rich enough to live in the bowl. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but it was basically that. And for HLA that is tracking all of these post-acknowledgement plan amendments through a specific project with a group of people who look at every Goal 10 implicated zone change regulation like this, we were absolutely stunned and said, no, we have to fight this. We are very selective. We don't have a lot of resources to take cases, but this one was absolutely lit our fire. So I just want to make it really clear that it was incredible to us that findings like that would be adopted.
Speaking of things that were surprising to see in writing in 2024, those were their justifications for this exclusionary zone. Their stated reason for it was to preserve the neighborhood character of a more affluent part of the city, which, if you've studied fair housing law, you know is an age-old dog whistle for we want it to keep looking white and wealthy. So we challenged that decision. We filed 2 different briefs. HLA and Fair Housing Council briefed this issue separately. We strategically chose issues that we each wanted to talk about. HLA was their primary, they briefed us several issues, but the primary issue that they briefed, and the one that I feel most qualified to actually talk about, or else I'm going to start sounding like I don't know what I'm talking about if I don't already, was that House Bill 2001 required that all areas zoned for single-family housing permit middle housing, and that was not something that Happy Valley could try to skirt around using what they termed the performance metric standard, which was something created by DLCD, which the legislature never really envisioned, so it's kind of a mystery how it came about. But HLA's primary argument was that was against the legislative intent of House Bill 2001. Fair Housing Council of Oregon, our primary assignment of error was that the decision violated the duty to affirmatively further fair housing. And that was also in House Bill 2001, and the duty to affirmatively further fair housing, I wrote it down because I don't have a printer. It's defined in Oregon statute. I'm just going to read it out loud because I think it deserves to live in our minds for a while. Affirmatively furthering fair housing means taking meaningful actions that, when taken together, address significant disparities in housing needs and access to opportunity, and replace segregated living patterns with truly integrated patterns to transform racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty into areas of opportunity, and to foster and maintain compliance with civil rights and fair housing laws. So I hope after hearing that you can understand why Fair Housing Council felt like this very clear division of where cottage clusters were allowed and where they are not was, in my opinion, furthering historical patterns of segregation. Not just my opinion, also a lot of other opinions too. But so that was kind of the crux of our argument. Obviously, appellate briefs go into a lot more detail than that. And our argument was, and Happy Valley's response was basically that this affirmatively furthering fair housing law doesn't apply to land use decisions, and which is problematic and technically was true according to the laws at the time. Our argument was that the city could not, on the one hand, what Josh described when he was talking, on the one hand, create a housing production strategy that on its face appears to be affirmatively furthering fair housing, or is taking actions that they say are affirmatively furthering fair housing, while on the other hand, making land use decisions, zoning decisions, that make that affirmatively furthering fair housing compliant housing production strategy impossible to carry out. And since a housing production strategy isn't a land use decision, LUBA can't have an opinion about it. But since the land use decision is the problem, the civil courts can't have an opinion about it. And so that was part of our argument to LUBA as well, is like, well, if you don't have jurisdiction to make decisions about housing production strategies, who does? I think now it's DLCD, or will be soon, but that was where we were. If a city didn't have a if the city zoned its housing production strategy into irrelevance, then there wasn't a way to really address that, and that was Happy Valley's goal, was to leave us without a venue. So, unfortunately, at least unfortunately insofar as we hold the Land Use Board of Appeals opinions in high esteem, they disagreed with us, and they affirmed the arguments by Happy Valley. Now, yeah,
But only
boo.
on that issue.
But
I'd
only on that
also
issue.
want to just clarify that in the Happy Valley case, like I was describing with Sherwood, you had this time-space continuum problem. So the housing production strategy had not actually been adopted yet. And so Stephen's argument was really that you are adopting an ordinance that is going to prevent your housing production strategy from resolving affirmatively furthering fair housing. So again, shooting yourself in the foot before you've even left the gate. And so that's the problem with a policy that isn't completely well thought out, and the practice of cities that don't want to comply with the policy. And so they game it like Happy Valley, like Sherwood. And just like Sherwood, Happy Valley is one of the most wealthiest suburbs in Clackamas County. So it's a pattern that is continuing to repeat itself. And, you know, there's hundreds of years of, 100 years of this kind of history that Stephen knows well from his fair housing work, but also many of us know from all of our housing work as well. So I just want to say that from a legal strategy, sometimes you lose to win. And so I know Josh is probably going to add a little bit. I don't want to cut you off, though.
No,
So,
no, I mean,
but a little bit on the land use side of this as
yeah.
well.
I mean, I'll let someone maybe more qualified than me or who's thought about it more talk a little bit about Housing Bill 2138. But suffice it to say that LUBA ruling against us was not the end of the story. HLA did appeal the decision. Fair Housing did not. We were under-resourced. I didn't have the availability, and I wasn't able to line someone up to do it for pro bono. So we weren't able to file an appeal on that. But HLA proceeded with an appeal. I had largely forgotten about the case. I was busy doing other things. Suddenly I'd get a notice of dismissal in the mail letting me know that the case had been dismissed. And that was actually when I found out about House Bill 2130. I'm like, why was it dismissed? Why aren't they fighting about this anymore? Oh, it's because it doesn't matter anymore. The legislature fixed at least some of the problems. So losing to win, like Jen said, sometimes you can get the attention you need on an issue that the legislature will actually fix the problems. But for instance, House Bill 2138, one of the issues that LUBA and Happy Valley latched onto is that the idea of an area that allows single-family housing is ambiguous. Well, it is technically. What's an area? Well, they resolved that ambiguity. Every parcel or lot zoned for single-family housing has to allow middle housing. So it's no longer, is this a single-family neighborhood? How much middle housing do we have to allow in it? On every lot. So they resolved some of those issues. I'm going to start entering into the area where I'm going to not know what I'm talking about. So I'm going to let someone else take the helm. Did you want to talk about House Bill 2138 a little more?
Let me just connect the dots also, and Josh, tell me if you were going to talk about this, but we actually won this case at LUBA. HLA won because it's not just that you have to look at Goal 10, which is the housing goal, but you also have to look at Goal 11, which is the public facilities goal. And Happy Valley didn't do the right work to justify its ordinance at all, because they were saying that you could go put all this cluster housing out at the edge in those other neighborhoods that Stephen talked about. And we said, well, where's your plan for transit? Where's your plan for wastewater? Where are your public facilities that need to serve this additional density far away from the city center? And they said, oh, well, we have all those plans. Take our word for it. And none of that was actually in the record. And so we won a remand at LUBA. And HLA appealed that remand. I mean, we appealed our victory. We appealed because we didn't agree with this outcome. So, Josh, why don't you add some more to that?
I can't necessarily add a ton to that. I was the attorney that briefed the administrative rule issue that Stephen brought up earlier. Unfortunately, the third attorney involved in that suit was unable to speak today. But I can actually speak more to kind of tying this back around to the HPS issue, because what we won on at LUBA that Jennifer was just talking about is something that you don't see in a lot of the HPSs. You see the cities ignoring the existence of services in a lot of their strategies and not explaining how the things they're proposing to do over the next 6 to 8 years will be impacted by accessibility for all kinds of public services, even though they are supposed to do that, I believe, under the HPS mandate.
And so the key here is that when you craft a legal strategy and you've been working with the state, with a lot of the people who have been on HLA's board are now at DLCD, and they're great allies to have, and they understood the issue that we were raising in the Happy Valley case, and they worked their tails off to do this legislative fix. And so in order for Happy Valley to not slip through the cracks, we had to keep the lawsuit alive. And so it's often about timing in legal activity. And so people should understand that HLA waves its sword when it can and when it needs to. And in that instance, we really needed that fix in there, because other cities would just do exactly what Happy Valley did and get away with it by playing games with words in the legislation. So we don't want to undermine the policy purpose by having legislation drafted too quickly or without understanding its real world implications. And sometimes you don't see those implications until the cities act and you go, oh, there is a loophole there, let's fix it and let's close it. So I really want to give credit to DLCD, even though we're pretty critical in our HPS commentary here, that you can read about or grab at our table after this session. So with that, I just want to say, we have plenty of time for questions, and we would welcome questions from the audience that I think Shail can probably take the...
Could I just add something to what you just
Yeah,
said?
please.
The exculpatory sentence there about DLCD. I don't put any of this on the agency, really. It's the legislature that handed us a policy that was very vague to begin with. And I think a lot of the issues come from that legislative vagueness, to be completely honest.
All right. Well, with that, we will have Shail run the microphone around to hear your questions.
Sam, you got a question? All right, so you four need to get closer since that mic cord's not very long.
Because not everyone in here has a land use law background, could you define LUBA and talk a little bit about what that means?
Sorry. So we love acronyms in land use, as you have now heard. So the Land Use Board of Appeals is like the trial court level for the review of all land use decisions, and they are a 3-attorney panel. We call them LUBA referees, but they are appointed by the governor. They're a state agency, and whenever you're in a land use matter at a local government level, you have the opportunity to raise or waive issues on quasi-judicial matters, or in legislative matters, you just have to participate. And all that testimony that's gathered during that, including staff reports and presentations to city councils or Board of County Commissioners, become the record. When you get to the Land Use Board of Appeals, the record is closed. So it's not like you see on TV. There's not witnesses to depose. There's no trial like you're used to seeing with a jury or anything like that. You just go before these judges, you present briefing and arguments on the briefs, and then the Land Use Board of Appeals can be appealed to the Court of Appeals, the Oregon Court of Appeals, and they are also 3-judge panels that sit and hear the proceedings. And then usually in land use, the Court of Appeals is the last stop, but you can seek review by the Oregon Supreme Court. The Oregon Supreme Court has discretion whether to take review or not. So a lot of land use ends at the Court of Appeals level, and that's where we were at, and then the legislation got adopted. The city attorney for the city of Happy Valley kept calling, oh, this legislation passed, just drop the case already, drop the case. I'm like, have the governor sign the bill, and then we can drop the case, and finally, by mid-August, the bill had been adopted, and we were willing to stipulate to this release. So, we are tremendously grateful to Margaret Gandervo at Sawfield Griggs, who did an amazing amount of pro bono work on HLA's behalf, and couldn't have done it without her. June Bradley is representing HLA in the Sherwood UGB expansion. We have our, if you've been by our table, Reed Johnson and Jordan Rasmussen, they're here in the session, who have been volunteering on the HPS project and also here at the conference. So it takes a village to do these things. HLA has no paid staff. We're just a bunch of scrappy, attorneys, retired attorneys, land use planners, and affordable housing professionals who really care about this work. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Andre Tremolay, who's a past board member, who was instrumental in the statewide adoption of affirmatively furthering fair housing. And if there's ever been a time to have affirmatively furthering fair housing an adopted state policy, it is right now. And so Oregon stands, of one of the few states that has this in their state policy, because the federal government is not going to be very helpful right now in enforcing these rules. So, really just, it's an exciting time to be in Oregon and have these rules on the books. So I think there was another hand up, or maybe. Oh, wow.
Thank you. I was wondering, I had trouble connecting the dots on the Portland plan. Like, it was very clear the problem, we still have the same segregated white rich neighborhoods that we did before. Could you do an explain on 5 what the plan is going to do to address that problem?
Sure. Yeah, and that's fair because it's not so direct. There's a couple of, so in the 35 actions that we have, they're sort of bucketed into 8 different initiatives. One of them is called, it's the letter C, increase access to opportunity, is maybe what that bucket's called. Sorry, we just passed our 1-year anniversary, so I don't have everything fresh top of mind anymore, but that one is specifically aiming at a bucket of strategies that will look to increase opportunity, and that's sort of a nebulous term, but that's creating more density or creating more housing units that are near to different services or amenities such as parks or schools or jobs. And that means disrupting in some ways our previous historical zoning patterns. So it's a little bit indirect the way that we talk about it. And then there's the flip side. So that's the sort of increasing access to opportunity by disrupting those exclusive zones. And then there's also increasing opportunity in concentrated areas of poverty or areas that have been disinvested. And some of those are still underway in the way that we talk about investment, particularly with TIF districts or large funding that's sort of concentrated in one area. There's also the risk of displacement, so those have to come with other sort of considerations to sort of not displace or gentrify folks who live there now. We want to create opportunity but let people have choice for where they can live. And so it's just that indirect connection for many of these different strategies of the relationship to where they have choice for different housing opportunities across the city.
I would also add that HLA was just recently updated about a project that the city of Portland has undertaken to actually do a city-sponsored zone change that is going to increase the density of certain properties that are connected to affordable housing development. And that is an expensive undertaking if you were just a property owner trying to do this. So even if it's not obviously listed in this presentation, or maybe it's a different division, or maybe even Ariel doesn't know about it, I won't say that, but okay, so that one was. So I just think those are the kinds of things that are happening. And then you have a check-in point with DLCD midway through your housing production strategy, or sometimes earlier if the if the agency put a condition of approval on your HPS. And then these are short term. So a housing needs analysis is like a 20-year plan, looking at how to, kind of match up with your comp plan timing or some other timing that's longer range. And the housing production strategy is intentionally shorter to try to not let it turn into a dust ball like the housing needs analysis gets turned into. So I think some of this is still kind of early days to see how the strategies turn into reality and what happens if they don't. Any other questions?
I don't really need that, but okay. Okay. So first, I'd like to thank each of you for the work that you do, because the work that you do is not easy. And when I heard you say you didn't get paid, that's kudos, kudos. A couple of things I was thinking about. So there was a lot of talk about the Sherwood neighborhoods and the wealth that those neighborhoods have. It's all by design. It has been. And so sometimes I wonder, when we sit in these sessions and have this dialogue, like, this is not new. It's been happening, and it's been designed so people of color don't have access to those areas. There are a lot of suburban communities in the Portland metro area, Washington County, Clark County, where you don't see people of color in those areas, and that's purposeful. And it's very sad, and it's discouraging, and all those things. And so I was thinking about the tax increment finance. And so when I bought my house in 2014, it was in Southeast Portland. So one of the incentives, unfortunately, because when I got approved, I couldn't live in North and Northeast Portland, which is where some of my roots are, right? But the tax abatement was the incentive. So we move you out, you don't pay taxes for 10 years. That's what the tax abatement is. And that's part of living out in Southeast Portland. But once the 10 years is up, then you start to pay regular property taxes like anybody else. It's yucky. That's what I need to say. It's not okay. And then I'm going to say this, and I'm going to be quiet because I can go on and on and on. I was thinking about the whole disparity of Lake Oswego, which for black folks has been known as Lake Negro. Like, you don't go over there. As a matter of fact, you're not wanted. And I commend the two guys who fought with the city of Lake Oswego so everybody can have access to that frickin' lake. You hear me? Okay. Yes, yes.
Well, thank you for all of those comments. I would add that Lake Oswego has actually had on its agenda the adoption of a local affirmatively furthering fair housing rule, which is pretty incredible. It might be low-hanging fruit given the state law and the purpose of the HPS, but in light of that comment, I think it is another change that we are seeing through this process where people at least have to put it on their books, and now other folks are gonna have to hold their feet to the fire. I will also just plug a little bit that on our table, there's an article that I wrote, and we're preaching a little bit to the choir, so you might all have a good handle on the history of segregation in our country, but this paper is short in terms of, if you're a lawyer, law review articles are dense and long, and this is only 8 pages, and it was written for a history journal. So if you're interested in that, in the way that land use zoning has perpetuated segregation, then pick it up. It's pretty accessible. And then it goes to your point also about, my theory is that even LIHTC projects should be paying attention to these things. So a lot of those projects get built in places where the land is cheap, and those are not areas of opportunity. And so you need to add this zoning lens and this historical lens of segregation to make better choices to disrupt the patterns. So I'll leave you that. And
I wanted to say, so I'm Shail Reuter. I am the Education Outreach Director at the Fair Housing Council of Oregon, and I recently did an AFFH training for the City Council in Lake Oswego. And it is a really interesting experience because there are city employees that are very aware of the challenges that are happening, that are trying to create movement and pressure. There are some city council members that are like, but we've already done all of this and we're not getting acknowledged. And then there's some city council members like, why are we talking about it still? And then there are some city council members that are absolutely like, yes, this is a problem and we need to continue to work on it, and we can have done work on it, but that doesn't mean that we don't still need to do more work on it, right? So I'm just thinking a lot from earlier sessions that I sat in on today, like the importance of creating political pressure through letter writing, right? Through reaching out and doing that to the city council members. So those members who are like, well, you know, we've already done so much, realize like, and there's more, right? And there's more. Thanks.
Hey, I think I may have missed this when I stepped out, but could you explain to me if there are any provisions within TIF district rules to prevent further displacement? You know, I think tax increment financing has a pretty sordid history of usually fueling displacement and gentrification.
Sure, yeah, I didn't mention, so again, 35 actions. I think there's 10 to 15 different project managers. They're all independent projects outside of the housing production strategy. Once they leave the housing production strategy, they kind of go to someone else. But with the TIFs, I know that they are still building out their action plans, and I know that it's a priority for Prosper Portland and for the Portland Housing Bureau to make careful investments, and so they do have a plan to coordinate housing within their action plan, but I also know that they are thinking about anti-displacement, but they're still actively working on those plans. I think they just started developing the committees, so community members are a part of the committees that develop the action plans, and so that will come later still.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I am wondering if you are seeing any cities or elected officials marry like housing production strategies with existing vacancies and like how to leverage existing vacancies. Because I feel like if we're talking about displacement, like evictions are happening today, right? And this is, we need a long-term plan. But we also like, I'm really excited, I know PHB just acquired a bunch of market rate housing, just purchasing it out of the market rate and then rent reduced it, and like I'm really excited about that as a solution. I'm curious if there's like, if we're marrying that as a production strategy, even though it's not sticks and bricks, but just that ability to like acquire existing empty buildings that folks can't afford to live in these areas.
I can only speak for the Portland Housing Production Strategy, but yes, there's two different strategies that Portland Housing Bureau commits to: that acquisition and conversion of and preservation of existing affordable units, as well as the conversion of market rate units. There might be some PHP folks in the room who wanted to speak more, but other jurisdictions, not sure.
I have a very brief answer, which is I have not seen that in any of the HPSs. Two of the HLA interns might be able to correct me on the ones that I haven't read, but I don't think I've seen that anywhere. The closest thing that I would say is maybe more cities are soft committing to land banking, which could be seen as a form of what you were talking about, but no actual like built housing unit vacancy strategies. I don't think I've seen any.
Actually, I believe the Dalles had...
Oh, hold on.
I believe the Dalles actually had a plan in their Main Street or downtown area to convert second floors on their commercial buildings to housing. That thing is the only one that I've seen in any HPS.
And just separate from the HPS strategy question, that process can be more difficult because I've worked with requesting affordable housing providers purchase some existing properties, and there's a really hard transition between the current tenants who don't income qualify and the tenants that need to be brought in. So you can't keep the old tenants in necessarily. So that's separate though from an HPS strategy.
Yeah, from what I've heard, I know that the city of Portland was able to buy entire buildings at really reduced rates, like a quarter of the cost of construction. And then a lot of the tenants, income qualified, were able to stay, and then they were able to move. But these are 200-person buildings with 20 tenants, right? So like Portland's particularly, I think this is unique to Portland, has buildings sitting empty that have tenants that also probably income qualify. And I just think that's such a unique opportunity right now that should be married to a production strategy and like combine those to show how fast we can truly do this, because we're not showing the public how fast, like that we're doing this with a rapid response.
I think I really like what you said. I think there's another layer to that where income qualifying buildings, like we develop housing. I'm at Northwest Housing Alternatives, and we have a building that's basically completely empty right now that's supposed to be affordable housing. But what we're seeing is, even though it's income restricted, people making 60% AMI are still not qualifying. So there's so many different layers there where, yes, we have the spaces, but the income is not there. We have residents who are being put into housing they're making $900 a month, and then they're qualifying for a $900 a month apartment. So a lot of these residents who are being placed in these buildings are not set up for success. And have you all seen any further planning around further action with putting people in housing and having a supportive plan around it?
I think those, what you're highlighting, I think, is a silo that continues to be a problem. You know, a lot of the work that's being done with housing production strategies and DLCD's HAPO is a connection between OHCS and DLCD, and that's really new also and unique. And so those problems are more like systemic than this panel could, I think, comment on it. I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything there.
I can't add necessarily directly to what you said, but there is a data point that doesn't necessarily have to do with the construction of the HPSs that really sticks out and should frighten everyone here, which is basically 50% or more of every household that is studied in the HPSs or the studies running up to the HPS is rent burdened, which means I believe it's 30% or more of income is going to rent. Obviously, HPS doesn't apply to every single city in the state, but if the cities that we have the data for are representative, over half the state's rent burdened.
Hi, maybe I'm a little bit off subject here, but to lay some context of why I might be. The way I got into this conference, everything, was tenant organizing, of which I never got paid for until I found some good people who actually valued my experiences. So perhaps I'm just still learning some things, but are these actions that the city of Portland is considering for the well-being, because that's what this is. We're talking about the well-being of people who are under-resourced, essentially. And then we're talking about 50% of which is rent burdened. And that, for me as a tenant advocate, translates to eviction. And one of the ways I got myself a job in housing, which is what I've wanted all the time. It's a little bit harder for me than everyone else here, though, to get good employment, is I, off my own free time, blood, sweat, whatever, helped launch a right to counsel movement in Portland. That actually was unsuccessful because the Greater LA Apartment Association sent mailers to all Portlanders with lies saying that their taxes would go up if they voted yes on this right to counsel measure. Is the city of Portland including anything like that in its action plans, or is it just about construction, development, and kind of like, I guess, as a bigger idea that I'm kind of pointing at is like, if we don't do something about landlords, what's going to happen? We're just going to keep having these talks. And as some very bright, I guess she left, lady back there mentioned, we've not only had these problems forever, but we've been talking about these problems forever. And that kind of seems like the reason why we keep talking about them. And there's great ideas, but I'll go ahead. As a trans woman here, I have no problem poking at some things that a lot of people don't want to talk about. But yeah, what's going on with that? Are there any actions included to kind of take that issue to bat?
Yeah, there's, from this conversation, you might have taken up that it's very land use oriented work. And so it, but I will say that that is a shortcoming in one regard, that it is quite focused on land use. In the housing production strategy for the city of Portland, we do include a initiative that is around stabilization, and that they are quite broad, but they try to touch on some of the work that the city already does. I would say there's plenty of opportunity to keep having conversation about how that actually fits in. I will also say the Bureau of Planning Sustainability with the Portland Housing Bureau and our counselors are working on the unified housing strategy, which will take the housing production and all of the other things that are happening at the city and identify gaps. And I think that we will find that there will be some gaps in how we support people who are housed but are not stably housed or who don't get access to services that they need. But yeah, very land use focused, for better or for worse, in the housing production strategy. So.
All right, we are out of time, but I want to thank Joshua, Stephen, and Ariel for this great presentation, and all of you.
All right, folks, and I believe that there's going to be an eval available, so really hope that you fill out the eval for this session. Thanks so much for being here.